All right, shall we go ahead and get started? My name is Krista Williford. I'm the Director of Research and Assessment at CLEAR, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. I'm joined by a group of geographically distributed team members. So let's have our team, if we have video, turn on our video so we can say hello and you can see who we are. So you should be able to see me now. Hi, I'm Krista.
Hi, I'm Joy Banks. I'm a program officer for CLEAR, and I will be handling most of the content of the webinar today, and I'm in Florida right now.
I'm Kristen Blair. I'm the program administrator for CLEAR, and I will be transcribing the webinar.
Hi, I'm Nikki Ferriolo. My video isn't working, sorry about that. But I am Director of Global Strategic Initiatives. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'll be helping out Kristen with transcription and be on call for questions that may be legacy questions related to earlier in the program's history.
And do we have Becca with us? Our colleague Becca Kwan, who is another program officer on this program, is connecting from the airport right now, so I'm not sure if she has audio or video working, but that's your team, and I'm connecting to you from Philadelphia. So welcome again to the webinar today, and congratulations once again on being selected as a grant recipient for the Recordings at Risk program. We have a varied and remarkable collection of projects represented here, and we're very happy to be working with all of you. So as we get started, if you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. As Joy has said, just make sure that you send your message to all panelists and attendees so all participants can see who you are and where you are. Our team thought it would be helpful to touch base as you begin your projects to clarify some of your responsibilities as grantees and to discuss how to handle certain situations that may arise in the future. So we'll begin the presentation by covering aspects of reporting requirements. Then we'll move on to sharing information about grant modifications, the exit interview, and then leave you with some additional notes on helping us to promote your projects. So at any time, you should feel free to type in questions into the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We will address all of those questions at the end. You can see the icon for the Q&A box by hovering your mouse at the bottom of the Zoom window. And as you know, if you've introduced yourself, you also have the option to send messages to everyone or just to presenters through the chat box. So we will try to monitor the conversation happening in both of those locations and of course address all the questions submitted through the Q&A box at the end of the webinar. So we're recording this session, as you see, so that you can revisit it in the future or share it with colleagues. So I'll now turn over the floor to Joy, who will be starting the presentation.
Great, thanks, Krista. So we like to start all of these presentations just by reminding you a little bit about what the mission is at CLEAR. So we exist as an independent nonprofit organization that forges strategies to enhance research, teaching, and learning environments in collaboration with libraries, cultural institutions, and communities of higher learning. So Recordings at Risk is just one of the many programs administered by CLEAR and is generously supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. You may know, and you may have heard, that we recently did receive a new grant from the foundation that allows us to continue this program for 4 more competitions. So we'll now be continuing to call for new proposals through the spring of 2021. Before we dive into our presentation, we just want to point out the Recordings at Risk Recipient Resources page. So just as the applicant resources page served as your sort of one-stop shop for proposal development, this is your website now for grant recipients. This includes information on the administrative components of holding a CLEAR grant, Most of the information we'll be covering today can be found there, so if you ever need a refresher on our policies, this is the place to look. And we'll also be posting the recording of this webinar on this page. We'll begin by going over CLEAR's reporting requirements for grantees. Since most of you are just starting your projects or may not have yet begun, it may seem a little odd to start with reporting, but seeing what will be required at the end may help you decide how to document progress and keep metrics, which may hopefully make the reporting easier when your projects are complete. You were all awarded grants this spring in the 5th Recordings at Risk competition. So for that reason, you'll hear us refer to you as a group as our Cycle 5 recipients. To keep things easy for everyone, we hope, we start by setting everyone on the same year-long project timeline with the same deadlines, regardless of the project length you originally proposed. We've found that this is really easiest for everyone. As you may recall, you could propose a project term that would last between 3 and 12 months. So all of your projects have been designed to be completed rapidly. However, for the purposes of setting reporting deadlines, our program will assume you proposed a 12-month project beginning on May 1st. Activities for all Cycle 5 projects must be completed no later than April 30th, 2020. Your final report form and financial assessment are due within 30 to 90 days of the project completion. So this would mean for everyone that the latest possible reporting deadline would be July 31st, 2020. So we'll just kind of cover this again because this is a lot of information. For all of you, the grant term begins May 1st, 2019. So that was the beginning of this month and ends April 30th, 2020. All project activities, including digitization, metadata creation, and providing whatever access you're providing as per your proposals, must be completed during this term, and grant funds must only be expended during this 12-month period. To change this timeline, you'll need to get approval from us, which we will cover shortly. And there's only one report required if you keep your projects within this 12-month time frame, and it must be submitted no later than July 31st, 2020. You may find that your project ends earlier than April 30th, which is fantastic, or that you're ready to submit your report earlier than July 31st, 2020. You're always welcome to submit your final reports early. And if that's the case, you just need to contact one of the CLEAR Grants team using the recordings@risk@clear.org program email so we can start the reporting process for you. Grant reports are submitted through the same portal you use to submit your application. So this is called SM Apply. We've included the URL for all of CLEAR's grant programs here, and this is also on the Recipient Resources page. You can, all communication and reminders for reporting will be sent to the primary principal investigator, or PI. So if there are any others involved in project work who need such notifications, you'll need to send us names and contact information for those people. Please share this information as soon as possible so we can keep our records up to date. If you can, you should log into SM Apply using the same email address and password you used to create your application. That's an important point. If you use these same credentials, you should automatically see the reporting form for your project when you log in. If you forget these credentials or lose access to them for any reason, for example, if the person who created your application leaves your organization, you'll need to contact us through our program email, so that's recordings@risk@clear.org, so that we can link your report to the correct credentials. One way to future-proof your team's access to the report would be to log in using the application credentials, hit start to pretend like you're starting your report, and then add other team members' email addresses as collaborators on your report. Collaborators will then receive an automatic invitation to verify their email addresses and create their own passwords to access the system. Once they do, they will also be able to log in to view the report and enter data. One of the system's safety measures ensures that only the primary principal investigator is able to submit a report. So if one of the collaborators eventually needs to submit, that person will need to contact us to make sure this can happen. So we're now going to take you on a tour of the reporting form itself. The first section of the report is the quantitative assessment. Here, you'll be entering information related to the numbers and types of recordings nominated for digitization, the number of archival master files produced, and variances between the estimated and actual digitization numbers. To complete this part, it will be helpful to have access to your original proposal for your project. Taking the time now to put a copy of your proposal in a place where all team members can access it is a very good idea. You can download a copy of your proposal by logging into the system using the same credentials you used to create your application. If you don't know where to find a copy of your proposal, you can always write to us to ask for one. You can opt in to volunteer to contribute data to the Digital Library Federation's Digitization Cost Calculator, a tool that provides estimates of time and cost to those planning digitization projects. The calculator does not yet support estimates for AV digitization, but they have expressed interest in expanding this tool to include it. So we've been collecting a list of volunteers who would be prepared to keep detailed time estimates for their digitization and metadata creation work. Your willingness to contribute data can help make this possible. If you only undertake digitization through external vendors, you might want to say no here. Either way, your response won't affect CLEAR's assessment of your project. The next reporting section includes space to document project developments, both internal and public. Internal developments may include things like digitization metrics, like tracking time data for steps in the project workflow, or preparing materials for shipping to the vendor, metadata creation, ingest, perhaps the implementation of new workflows, standards, protocols, or procedures for digitization and description, the implementation of new tools or systems, and the new donations or grant applications. CLEAR pulls together data about the impact of this program for its own annual reporting to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So providing as many details as you can about the ways that this opportunity affected your organization, collections, staff, ways of working will be very helpful to us. Taking notes somewhere about the impact of this grant will help you easily complete this section. We also want to hear about public developments, such as the creation of new blogs, social media accounts, websites, or content created for existing ones, research guides, online or physical exhibitions, news articles, the incorporation of digitized materials into curricula at any educational level, or publications or presentations about the project or arising from research using the digitized materials. Again, keeping a file with copies of these kinds of documentation will make the reporting process easy for you. You'll also have a chance to append copies of these documents to your report, demonstrating the varied and creative ways you will use your project to educate and serve others. Here's a quick glimpse of what these impact questions look like on the reporting form. The report form includes simple checkboxes to document activity, which you'll then have the opportunity to explain further in the narrative portion of your report. So here's the checklist for internal impacts, and here's the checklist for the public outcomes. Because Recordings at Risk is designed to support smaller scale efforts focused on preservation, reformatting of audio and audiovisual materials over short periods of time, CLARE does not expect that all of these things will happen in the course of your work. Most recipients just check 2 or 3 boxes here, and some don't check any at all, and that's okay. Just check any boxes that do apply to you so we'll know to look for them in your narrative and to account for them in our own summary reporting to the Mellon Foundation. Next, we ask grant recipients to share with us where users can go to find information about the digital copies of the recordings reformatted through your project. Some of you will be providing public access to both the digital files and the associated metadata created through your project, and some will only be providing public access to the metadata. In case you've forgotten, I want to re-emphasize here that creating and providing access to metadata for the digital copies of the recordings created through your project is a requirement of the program, and CLARE expects that you will create and publish online at least some basic metadata for the digital copies of the recordings so people can learn about what you have. At the end of your project, you may still have work to do to add richer descriptions, subject headings, or even transcriptions or captions, but we do expect that some basic records about what you've done be posted somewhere online. You'll have the option to include up to 10 URLs. We encourage you to provide a few high-level links to the collections rather than many lower-level links. These links allow us to verify that you have made metadata at the least, and as well as verify that those of you who can make the digital surrogates of recordings available for streaming online have done so. Again, we understand that for some of you, legal and ethical issues will make it impossible to provide full access to copies of your recordings. If this is the case, you just need to provide one or more links to where your metadata is at the end of your project. You can also provide more information about future locations for your metadata and files in the narrative sections of your report. After this, you'll provide contact information for the project's PIs, service provider, and the person who should be contacted if questions emerge about the report. You'll then add your financial narrative and either save this section of the form or mark it as complete. The financial narrative should address each line in your project budget. Marking the report as complete will take you to the review page, where you can double check the information you entered and see the additional steps you need to take. There are a few documents to upload before you'll be ready to submit your report. If you look to the left side of this screen, you'll see buttons that will prompt you to upload the remaining components of the report, which we'll go over now one by one. The first and perhaps most important part of your report is the project narrative. This will be an uploaded document of no more than 6 pages, which will contain the types of information listed here, a summary of project and the purpose of your grant, your progress toward outcomes, where you can explain any numbers or variances in your quantitative section, any surprises, setbacks, challenges that you faced, significant accomplishments and lessons learned, and finally, your future plans. Ultimately, this is information that will help us create resources that can be of use to other institutions wanting to initiate their own AV digitization projects. We'll also share the lessons learned from grantees with our funder, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. If you take the time to compile notes somewhere about these topics during the course of your project and save those notes in the same place you keep your copy of the original proposal, you will thank yourself at the end when the final report deadline approaches. Here's a screenshot of what you'll see when you're asked to upload the form, which you'll notice includes directions about all the topics your narrative report should cover. You'll also be asked to upload a project manifest, a spreadsheet which includes the names and locations of the digital files, normally the access copies, as well as notations about any checksums and restrictions. We're requiring this because we are developing a tool, a kind of web crawler, that will allow us to conduct periodic checks that the online files created through CLEAR's digitization re-granting programs are, in fact, online. Note that CLEAR's template for this has multiple tabs, including one with instructions, so be sure to read through all of them. Taking a look at this template now and building in time to create this document into your workflow will help you save time later. Normally, your digitization vendor will return a spreadsheet to you that will be very similar to what you need to submit here, and you should be able to adapt the vendor's spreadsheet for this template. If you work out your file naming conventions at the start and ensure your vendor names your files exactly according to your needs, most of your work for this requirement will be done. If you leave it until the end, it might take some time scrambling to pull it together. So we do strongly recommend coming up with a strategy for compiling this data during the course of project work. Of all of the pieces of the final report, this document is what allows us to verify that you have created all of the deliverables agreed upon when you receive funding. If, in the midst of your project, issues arise that will affect your ability to reach the goals included in your application, reach out to us at the CLEAR Grants team so we can help you decide the best course of action. We'll go over how to do that shortly, but first let's just finish with the report form. The final part of the reporting requirements that we want to touch on is the financial assessment, which comes in two parts. The first is in the financial narrative, which we glimpsed at earlier in the main report form. In the financial narrative, you can comment on actual grant expenditures during the reporting period as they relate to your proposed budget. Every budget category should be addressed here, and if there are any variances of 5% or more between projected and actual spending, make sure to include a detailed explanation here. This is also where we'd ask for you to describe any sort of modifications that involved your budget. You should explain those here. The second part is the financial report, which is an upload using the same budget and financial report template that you submitted with your proposal. The only difference is that you have both the budgeted and actual fields of the template filled in for the final report. This is another good reason to make sure you have a copy of your entire proposal saved somewhere where all your team members can access it. You'll prepare the financial report beginning with the same file you submitted with your proposal. As a reminder, I know it's pretty soon after you submitted proposals, but here's what our budget and financial reporting form looks like. It's important that you use this template for your financial report rather than any internal financial reporting forms your institutions may use. Note that there is a budgeted comment column for the information submitted with your proposal and an actual column for the information about what you spent during the grant term. Some of you may find that you do not spend all of the grant, and that's okay. We will, however, expect you to return any unexpected funds to CLEAR at the time you submit your final report. We noted earlier that SM Apply allows you to add other email addresses for collaboration who will contribute to your support as you develop the report in the system. We do recognize, however, that sometimes it isn't realistic to expect all members of the team to figure out how to log in and use this system. So for that reason, we've also created a Google Doc template that your team can use to prepare your draft report. The document includes the full information requested in the report, covering both the questions on the reporting form and the documents that will be added as uploads. You may remember using a similar document to prepare your proposal. It's the same principle here. Just make your own personal copy of the document and save it somewhere your team members can find it. Then when your team is happy with your report, copy and paste from the document into the SM Apply system to submit your report. Because the reporting form was intended to group questions thematically, and because SM Apply is built in a way that requires uploads to be added at the very end, the order of questions in the Google Doc template is somewhat different than the order of questions in SM Apply. However, the content of the questions should be identical. You can access the Google Doc template using the link on our Recordings at Risk Recipients Resources page. To make a personal copy of the template that you can edit, click on the text that says, "Click here to make a copy of this document." This copy can then be shared with anyone who will be collaborating on the draft proposal. Once you've finished your proposal, you must copy your report responses into SM Apply to submit your final report. And I did say that twice, I guess, because it's super important that you use the application system. So now that we've made it through the reporting form, we need to address how you can make changes to your plans if unforeseen delays, problems, or staffing changes happen during the course of your work. So over the course of many, many grant projects, we've seen that the need often arises to request modifications. Due to the unpredictability of audio and audiovisual digitization initiatives, such requests are extremely common for this program, and you should not hesitate to ask for what you need to do it to successfully complete your project. CLEAR has an online modification request form through which recipients can notify us of any modification requests, such as no-cost extensions, PI changes, and reallocation requests. The form was designed to streamline the process and reduce the amount of time spent making and approving these requests. Access to the grant modification and extension request form is available through a link at the top of the Recipient Resources webpage. The same form is used across CLEAR's grant programs and is designed to allow for the request of multiple types of modification requests. The form includes sections on descriptive information, questions about extension requests, other modification requests, and a space at the end to provide a brief explanation and justification of the modification. In order for you to prepare the necessary information for the modification request, we also provide a grant modification form template linked to on this slide and then also available on the Recipient Resources page. This shows the Google Doc template for the modification request form. The online form does involve some question logic, so you may not be required to answer all of the questions on the template depending on how you answer others. A link is provided at the top of this document that allows you to create a copy of the template for collaborative working. All modification requests should be submitted through the online form, so you'll need to copy and paste your prepared responses into that space. Here's a glimpse of what the online grant modification and extension request form looks like. Once the form has been submitted and received, you should hear from CLEAR staff within 2 weeks. For that reason, if you need a modification, it's important to request it at least a few weeks before the final date of your grant. For all of you, again, that final date is April 30th, 2020. In many cases, completing the form will be all you need to do to get approval for a modification. However, under certain circumstances, additional documentation may be required in order to move forward with the request. Multiple types of modification requests can be submitted at the same time using this same form. For example, if you need to request a no-cost extension as well as a reallocation of funds, the form will accommodate both requests. The guidelines for modification requests vary slightly between CLEAR's different grant programs, so be sure to check the Recipient Resources pages for the most up-to-date information. And if you ever have any questions about the process, CLEAR staff is always available via email through our program email address, and that's recordingsatrisk@clear.org. Now, for some more information about the types of modification requests. No-cost extensions are allowed in the case of unforeseen delays, such as hiring or vendor processing delays. These are very common, but it is important to understand you can only receive one extension per project. For this reason, if you find you need an extension of your grant term, we recommend you request the extension about 4 to 6 weeks prior to the project end date. And again, that project end date is April 30th, 2020. If you'd like to make a note on your calendar, you can make an appointment now for on or about, say, March 15th, 2020, to remind yourself that it will be time then to request an extension if you need one. As a reminder, the project end date is not the same as the reporting deadline. The end date is simply the date at which point all project work should be complete. It's important that extension requests are submitted and approved prior to the end date. The project end date is listed in your award letter. Even if you've spent all the grant funds, you will need an extension if you need additional time to complete your proposed project deliverables, including making the metadata for your project available online. If all project deliverables are not complete or expected to be complete by April 30th, 2020, you'll need an extension. If you need to switch principal investigators, PIs, let us know as soon as possible by completing the grant modification form. All of CLEAR's grant management tasks require current contact details for every grant's principal investigator. So it's important we know when a PI departs your organization and their responsibilities are transferred to someone else. In order to complete the change of PI, you'll also be required to supply via email a letter on institutional letterhead from the head of the institution or department. And this letter should include the name and title of the new PI, as well as the date the change will become effective. A CV for the new PI will also be required for our files. On occasion, grantees find it necessary to spend grant funds in a manner other than originally proposed in their application. For example, vendor services may cost more or maybe less than they originally budgeted. Reallocations of grant funds are allowable, but these changes must be approved by CLEAR staff prior to the reallocated funds being spent. In cases where a budget surplus remains after the original deliverables have been met, you will have the option of either returning the surplus funds to CLEAR or submitting a budget reallocation request that proposes how the remaining funds will be spent. Any proposed use of reallocated funds should be aligned with the original goals and scope of the project and within the current guidelines for allowable and disallowed costs for the Recordings at Risk program. The first step for reallocation requests is completing the grant modification form, where you can explain the rationale for the reallocation and how it is consistent with the original proposal. CLEAR staff encourages spending surplus funds on additional digitization of material or increased spending for another previously approved line item in the project budget, rather than adding new line items to the budget. All reallocation requests must fall within the guidelines of the program and abide by allowable and disallowed cost restrictions. If a mutually satisfactory reallocation solution cannot be found, funds must be returned to CLEAR. Note that small reallocations amounting to less than 5% of the total project budget and within the program guidelines do not require a formal reallocation request, but we do ask that you explain these variances in your final report. If you have any questions about whether or not you need official approval for a reallocation, we're always available through our program email, recordingsatrisk@clear.org. In some rare instances, such as when a reallocation request does involve a new budget line item, our team will require the completion of an updated budget document. It's the same budget template you use to complete your application. CLEAR staff can provide a copy to you if necessary. This new budget will replace the one submitted with your application. Some information will remain the same, such as your project start date and award amount. You'll need to update any lines where you are proposing a change in amount and add any additional lines as needed if you're proposing a new spending category. In some cases, reallocations may happen within the already approved line items. When that's the case, we likely will not require the submission of a new budget, and an explanation of the changes submitted through the grant modification form, as well as in your final report, will likely suffice. When filling out this form, be sure to include the name and title of the person filling out the form. Institutional shared costs should not be included on the budget form, which is also true when you're going to complete this for the final report. Okay, so that is grant modifications. Now we're going to talk a little bit about exit interviews. As the projects from the first two cycles of Recordings at Risk have ended, we've started the process of conducting exit interviews for all projects. These short 30 to 45-minute conversations with our recipients allow CLEAR to assess the program's impact as well as to document how newly digitized collections are being accessed and used. This is important data for our own reporting to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, so we hope you'll be able to make yourselves available to conduct an interview with CLEAR staff members sometimes toward the end of 2020. Starting between 3 and 6 months after you complete your final reports, a member of our team should contact you about an interview at a time convenient for your team. We want to give a bit of time for things to develop after the project is over. This way, we can discuss how the program has shaped your overall institutional strategy for audiovisual collections. We are particularly interested in hearing about how the digitized materials have been used, how you're keeping usage metrics, and what lessons you might have learned. The first interviews we've done have been very rich conversations, and our team has been learning a lot through them. So here's some points stressed by past participants that may be useful to you as you get started. Number one, I think from everybody, was that metadata creation for our audiovisual materials takes a lot longer than originally anticipated for most recipients. For this reason, past recipients advise that new recipients consider how they can lay the groundwork for creating project metadata while waiting for materials to be returned from the vendor. Taking digital photographs of the containers for your recordings may help expedite metadata creation if it's an option, so consider whether it might be possible to do that. Next, get your whole project team together as early as possible to make sure everyone understands individual roles and responsibilities, even if their contribution will only be made late in the project timeline. That way, each team member can make room on their schedules to do what they need to do in a timely and efficient manner. If the recordings to be digitized for your project are part of a larger collection, set aside some additional backup items from that collection to send to your vendor as well, just in case the digitization work costs less, which we have seen, than the original estimate. If you get lucky and have extra funds left over, you can then authorize the vendor to digitize the backup items once you have secured approval from CLEAR to digitize additional recordings through the grant. Also, finally, keeping notes and documentation for your project in one common place for easy reference will make final reporting easier. Determining how you're going to gather the information needed for the project manifest now, in particular, will save you valuable time at the end. We love to show off the excellent work of our grantees. If there are exciting developments you would like shared with a wider audience, don't hesitate to let us know. So one of the easiest ways to do this and for us to share is if you tag us on Twitter at ClearRAR so that we can retweet you. If you happen to be describing the Recordings at Risk program in any formal press releases, please let us review the materials ahead of time. We request this because it's very easy to unintentionally say something about CLEAR or about the program that might confuse potential applicants. Approval of your press releases should take no more than a day or two at the most. So on that note, this link on the slide will take you to some acknowledgement guidelines, and we will be posting these slides online too, so you'll have access to these links. The acknowledgement guidelines were created by our Director of Communications, and these will help provide assistance for a variety of situations, such as news releases, social media posts, press events, and so on. We also want to make sure you're representing us correctly. We're representing you correctly. Your projects are now on the funded projects page on our website. There's already been a few of you who have helped us correct some issues with those. We just wish and ask that you would read how your project is described there and let us know if you'd like us to adjust any of the information included there. The text we used there did come directly from your proposals. So I think that does bring us to the end of our presentation, and we know that we've covered a lot of information here, and that's why we will be posting a recording of this webinar, as well as the slides, transcripts, and any Q&A that we discuss now on the Recipient Resources page. And then there's all the other documents too that we've talked about through this presentation. But if you have any other questions as your projects progress, you can always reach out to the CLEAR Grants team at our program email address. And that's one more time, it's recordingsatrisk@clear.org. So now we're going to shift to some Q&A, and I know some of you have already started to post questions in the Q&A box. If you have not found that already, you can just hover to the bottom of your Zoom screen and you should be able to find it there. So Krista, do you want me to read questions or do you want to read questions?
I can read questions and give you a bit of a break.
Okay.
So we have two in the queue right now. So Missy Thomas asks, grant modifications are officially submitted by our central office. If we add the central office contact as a collaborator, will they have access to submit the grant modifications through the system? So Joy, do you know the answer to that question since you designed the modification form?
Yeah, so our modification form is actually just built in a SurveyMonkey account. So that does not require any sort of login or profile. It's just a pretty simple form. They will need to have things like contact information for project staff, the title of your project, your grant number, some basic financial information, but you can also use that Google template to see everything that we ask and just make sure they have all of the information. And within the form, we do have a spot where they can say that notifications can be sent to other email addresses. So I would probably communicate to your office that the PI or other project staff would like to be included with notifications about modifications, just so that everybody is kept informed. We use the contact information on that form pretty much exclusively. So it's useful to have as many emails as you need on that, but they wouldn't need to be added to your system unless they'll also be helping contribute to your final report. And that's a different system.
All right, and we have another question, and I believe this would be for Kristen. Kate Dundon asks, has CLEAR mailed out official award letters and checks yet?
Hi, Kate. They have been mailed out. They were mailed last week on the 30th. So they should be coming to the address that was supplied in your application. If you wanted to verify what that address is, you can email us at recordingsatrisk@clear.org.
Great. So that's all the questions that we have so far. So we'll just take a few minutes now to see if all that information we've threw at you has sunk in, or if you need anything repeated. All right. Here we have another from Adair Lamborn. Does clear recordings at risk require use of any particular descriptive standards for the metadata? Where should metadata be made publicly available? We do not require the use of any particular descriptive standards. That's going to vary by the circumstances in which you're working and the systems that you have at your disposal. So we do recommend that you consult standards like the FADG standards for ideas, and that you don't sort of invent your own system for describing your materials, but that we're not promoting like a one-size-fits-all solution, because that would be a losing battle for us to fight. So for the second part of your question, where should metadata be made publicly available? Typically, that's through a catalog of some kind, but you may have kind of a collection record or a finding aid related to the materials that you could link, even a simple spreadsheet with the metadata you've created for your project. If you're not, for example, going to be able to make copies of the actual recordings publicly available, then just having a kind of a simple downloadable spreadsheet could be all that users would need in order to make sort of relevance judgments about whether they need to come to your site in order to view the recordings.
And I'd also add to that in your proposal, everybody was asked to put forward a plan with how these would be made available. So that was what the reviewers were looking at when projects were assessed. So there might be some information in there about what you were thinking, or what project writers were thinking about when they were thinking about sharing metadata.
Great. We have another question here. Will you please review how to add others on to receive clear notifications beyond the PI? Well, we actually covered, I think, and Joy, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, two ways to add people to your team. First, if you have team members that you want us to add to your record so that we're sending out copies of official notifications about your grant, such as notifications of your, the reporting deadlines and so forth, you can just send us that information to recordingsatrisk@clear.org. The other way, if you want collaborators to work with you on the final report, you log into SM Apply and then add collaborators to your report. And Kristen, I don't think we had a screenshot of that. Did I explain that well enough, or is there any other detail you can give to give instructions on how to find the Add Collaborators button?
Yes, when you log into SM Apply, you click Start on your report, and then on the left-hand side, you'll see Collaborators and Add.
Great. I hope that addressed that question, but let us know if not. So, so we have another question. I was taking a look at the acknowledgement guidelines, and I was wondering if you could explain this passage. Audio video broadcasts must include the tagline, "This project is supported by a grant from the Council on Library and Information Resources. Video broadcasts must display the CLEAR logo." I think that that guideline does not apply to content, to audio and visual content digitized through this program. It is for audio or visual recordings made about CLEAR. So, so you don't need to worry about that. It's great when people acknowledge CLEAR in the metadata, for example, for their recordings, and we think that's wonderful. That's not always possible, but you certainly do not need to edit or put CLEAR's logo on on your streaming copies of the recordings that you're digitizing through this grant. So did I address that correctly, Joy?
To be quite honest, I don't know.
Yeah, we hadn't considered that.
Nikki, just typing in. Yeah, Krista, you addressed that correctly. Mostly, for instance, we've had some kind of short documentaries or promotional videos made about some of the digitization projects. And so this is kind of a tagline that we'd like included, if possible, in some, if you have any promo videos that are related specifically to this project.
Great, thanks, Nikki. So we'll just wait here for another couple minutes to see if there are any additional questions. All right. Not seeing anything. If not, we really hope that this webinar was useful to you. And yes, thank you for your time and attention here. And we really look forward to working with you on your projects in the coming year.
Yes, and just don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions at all. At any point during your project, we're more than happy to help answer even the smallest question.
All right, thanks, and bye everybody.